Joining us now from the Loyola University Maryland Selinger School of Business is Gloria Phillips-Wren, Professor of Information Systems. Professor, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jeff.
So there's this motel on Route 1 that I drive by a lot that has a big sign out front that says, "We accept Bitcoin." I'll come back to that in a minute, but what is Bitcoin?
You know, a lot of people are trying to figure that out. Actually, it's a really interesting idea, I think. In some senses, it's a digital unit. It's something that sits in a computer. It's a string of zeros and ones. Now, that particular block or string of things happens to have some properties associated with it. And then we also have protocols for how they're created. So there are aspects of it that are like a currency. It's been called a virtual currency in the sense that you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't smell it. But on the other hand, there seems to be ways that you can transact business with it, assuming that you find a willing partner on the other side. Some of the things that you can do with them, though, we have found, is they can be created. They can be transferred, and there's a lot of work right now going on to see whether, for example, you can exchange them legally. The IRS simply calls them a property.
We've seen pictures. We used a picture at the top of the show of a pile of coins embossed with the letter B, and like it's a dollar sign with a slash through it. But there is no such thing. I mean, that's just sort of a useful way to think about it. There is no physical Bitcoin.
Right. There is no physical Bitcoin, and in fact, the currency that you have, if you will, inside of the computer can be split up into really small little pieces. So just like we have a dollar bill, well, if you think about a dollar bill, that's sort of interesting, right? I mean, we can physically see it. I can hand one to you, but on the other hand, what is a dollar bill? In some senses, it's a piece of paper. It's really the trust that we have, and that is a medium of exchange that makes it actually worth something. And I think a Bitcoin's sort of the same way. If I have something virtual, and you think it's of value, which a lot of people out there actually do right now, then we can use it as a medium of exchange.
I read that the total value of all the Bitcoins, Ethereum, the other cryptocurrencies put together exceeds the value of Goldman Sachs. So it's a huge number that's been, incredible value has been created. Is it real? I mean, is this a fad? Is this tulip bulbs in the 1600s?
Well, some of the financial advisors that are out right now are really warning people to be really careful dealing with Bitcoins, and the reason for that really is their volatility. If you look at that curve, you know, that graph in terms of when they go up and down, huge swings. So yes, you can make money, and wow, you sure can lose a lot too. Some of the financial advisors I've read have said this isn't real, you know, something that isn't something that you can actually have any innate value in really isn't something real.
All right, so as a professor of information systems, you understand the math, the computer science behind this better than I ever will. Is it as brilliant as it's been described?
I think it's really exciting. The technology that sits behind it was invented, if you will, around 2008. It was published in a paper, and there's a lot of mystique around this. It makes it really fun. So the author, we think, was actually writing under a pseudonym. Some people have done things like handwriting analysis to figure out who it is. They think it could be a team of people. But essentially what the author did in this, based on some previous research, was to come up with a concept called a blockchain. And that is the way that Bitcoins essentially are enabled. If you think about the idea of something virtual, it's not only do you want to know how does it exist, but you also want to know how can I transfer it to someone else. And if I can transfer it to you, could I take the same Bitcoin and say transfer it to someone else? So the protocol that needed to be built and was created in 2008 was a way to solve that problem.
Okay, well, I want to come back to blockchain in a second, but the idea of how Bitcoins are created, how they come into existence, they're mined, not with a shovel, but with server farms. How? What's going on in that server farm?
Well, this is really neat, I think. So in the initial way that they were constituted, they created a set of a block of 210,000 individual pieces, and they gave that an encryption. So just like we're used to taking normal encryption, and you have a single unit and you encrypt it. The brilliance here was that when the second block came around, that second block was tied to the first block. So that to encrypt the second block, you needed not only its encryption key, but you also needed some information coming from the first block. And so that essentially built it up. Now, if you're a miner out there, you earn money, that is Bitcoins, by solving, and that's usually referred to as verification, by verifying the chain. So if you think about that as like a huge mathematical puzzle that takes lots and lots of computing power, then you really have to have some time, right? So there's time and energy expended in that to actually sort of solve, if you way back through the chain. Right now, currently, I think that you earned, in the initial set, 50 Bitcoins for solving a block, a 210 block. Now what that will have every 210,000. So in the second iteration, the next 210,000, ever who solves that gets 25 coins, and so on along the way. And if I throw a little mathematics in, if you don't mind,
Please.
you actually have a geometric series, right? So it's each time you're doing half as much for the initial starting condition that you have. And so that's a convergent mathematical series because R is less than 1. So the total number of Bitcoins, and they expect that to go out to something around 2020, 2022, is expected, well, it will be no more under current conditions than 21 million.
So if you had a bunch of computers at your disposal, which you do, and you had a bunch of students with some time,
Right.
could they mine these? Could they create Bitcoins?
Well, there are people out there trying. It's just that the computing power is monstrous that's required for these. So people are doing things like buying shares in computing resources to see, and you can earn parts of a Bitcoin. So the miners out there are trying to essentially earn Bitcoins by verifying this long chain, and that's a service really to the entire community, because one of the other brilliances of Bitcoin is that the information about them and all the transactions are actually distributed to the entire community. So everybody has a copy of the transactions.
So that's the blockchain.
Well, that's also Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin is built on this idea of a blockchain, and so that's handed to the entire community. In this case, it's an open source community, so everybody has a copy of the transactions. The miners are the ones that verify the transactions that occurred.
Now, I just read that half of the largest companies in the world are investing in blockchain technology. That doesn't mean they're buying Bitcoin necessarily, but they are looking at how they can use this public ledger, as it's been referred to, as a way of simplifying, lowering costs for all sorts of different kinds of record keeping. Is that legit?
Oh, I think this is really exciting. So this is something that companies would really be interested in, particularly in some of the industries that you have out there. First of all, the problem that really blockchaining really brings up is this idea of disintermediation. So I don't know if it's a word you know, but the idea is that we have intermediaries. So for example, if you want to know how much money is in your account, who do you go to? The trusted resource, and the trusted resource is the bank. So the bank therefore is an intermediary for you, right? And for all of us really acting out there. Well, suppose you didn't really need to go to the bank. Suppose you have a verified blockchain. It's available to the entire community. So one of the things that a bank should be worried about is, geez, can I be disintermediated? And if so, we get into this really interesting field in information systems called disruptive technologies. And so the question is, maybe I won't need banks in the same way that perhaps, I don't any longer need to have someone help me rent a house, right? When I go somewhere, if you think about Airbnb and Uber, another one, for example, out there who's enabling more of a peer-to-peer sort of relationship.
And that's why big business is jumping on this. But I'm going to come back to that small business on Route
Right.
1, the motel, the old motel with a sign out front that says, "We take Bitcoin." And one of the reasons that's notable is that Bitcoin has been used as a medium of exchange, transfer of value, but from people who are up to no good, illicit things such as ransomware, hacking somebody's computer. Does it transfer over to legitimate stuff at some point?
It can if people trust it, and I think that's just like any currency, right? One of the advantages of something like a Bitcoin would be the fact that we all have access to it. So it is something that is a public good. And there's some ideas that when it was originally developed, some of these technologies, it was really in response to things like bank failures and some of the fraud that we see. So it's interesting being used for fraud, where in some senses there's some indications it might have been invented as a way to react against the fraud that you saw, right? So the other part of that then, in terms of medium of exchange, is regardless of what the item is, if we think back just historically, you and I have used things as a medium of exchange anywhere along the way. So if Bitcoin is to be accepted by your little motel down the road, right, something like that, then that is something you trust and they trust. It's actually, right now though, it's going to cost you a really lot to buy one of those pieces of Bitcoin. So actually, I think they would be coming out probably pretty good in the end. Yeah, it's a very nice speculative sort of thing to do.
Gloria Phillips-Wren is a professor of information systems at Loyola University, Maryland. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks.